today for our IJIS Institute webinar series on body-worn cameras. I'd like to turn things over to our Executive Director from the IJIS Institute, Steve Ambrosini.
Well, welcome everybody, and today this is a subject that is significant to all of us, as you all are aware. And today you're going to hear from a panel of experts that are going to talk from the perspectives of law enforcement, policy, academics, and technology. So today we're really looking forward to bringing such a important set of perspectives together for all of you. And on behalf of IJIS, I'll repeat Mr. Gavin's statement here. Thanks to all of you for making time for us today. As I mentioned, this is probably one of the most, if not the most significant issue with public safety and justice agencies today. And it's part of a broader issue that I think we all look at, and that's the, really the challenges and really being able to achieve the opportunities of the new technologies that are available to us today. But there are many of the challenges, and I think from the IJIS Institute perspective, what we really look at in these areas is how we work collaboratively to provide education and really build partnerships with leaders from the practice associations, from the technology industry, and really get what I'll just say the best thinking we can to these subjects. So today we're gonna get started here in a minute. I want to just mention to you one administrative item, and that is we will have questions. Will be open for questions at the end. So there is a question box, and we ask that you please use it. Go give us a good way to conserve your questions as we go through the discussions today. And as I mentioned, we have really a very strong panel to talk about this subject today, and I'm going to introduce our first speaker now. It is Mr. Michael Rosa. Michael is a Senior Policy Advisor with the Bureau of Justice Assistance at the Department of Justice, and is the person right now who has the task of looking at how we're going to be supporting this initiative nationwide, working with again the public safety and justice agencies that are ready and looking forward to participating. So Mike, if you're ready, we're all set.
Absolutely. Great. Thank you very much, and welcome everyone. It's always good to talk to this crowd. It's a really diverse crowd, interesting from the BJA perspective, the number of areas BWCs have touched, and I think you'll see that represented in our panel today as the discussion wanders through the various areas. I really wanted to set a national perspective for the body-worn camera projects and going-ons. As Assistant Chief Figueroa will attest, the agencies in the U.S. have been doing this probably at most about 7 years. In the U.K., probably around 10 years. So there's a body of knowledge, and we all recognize that in law enforcement and in criminal justice, technologies take a while to really grab hold. Sometimes it's something as devastating as a Ferguson or a Baltimore type situation to really drive the technologies to a new level. Sometimes it just takes longer, and a consistent theme I want to push is we really need to make sure we learn from the lessons of LPRs. LPRs are a great tool, but it has wandered through, just like BWCs at this point, body-worn cameras at this point, wandering through this policy development, correct implementation, maintenance of storage and technology, collaboration and integration, all the areas. We have so many lessons, and we still have so many mistakes out there still with LPRs. So I think it's really representative of the kinds of problems that we want to stay in front of in the body-worn camera environment. I also wanted to just do a call out to all the agencies and areas that have been so helpful. First are the probably 3,000 to 4,000 local agencies, state and local agencies that have delved into body-worn cameras over the past 7, 8, 10 years and really give us a working body of knowledge. We have to learn from their efforts, from their mistakes, as well as their successes, and bring that forward and make sure that it's shared. BJA started this about a year ago now by pulling together what ended up being a February expert panel. And that expert panel consisted of long-established implementers from various areas, and we really represented not just law enforcement and the law enforcement police and union and management, but also the rest of the criminal justice environment, identifying the prosecution, the judicial, the privacy advocacy, as well as the victims advocacy in other areas. And we needed that because they were some of the gaps that we saw that were out there, and we wanted to document that, and it was all based in, and Dr. White will get into this later, to the creation of the body-worn camera toolkit, which I hope you visited and hope you know about. It's www.bja.gov/BWC. And that kit is just there to make as open and transparent the process for setting up and implementing a body-worn camera. And that flips me back to thanking the agencies. The COPS office did the seminal work in the implementation guide, very useful, learned a lot of lessons using PERF and COPS together, worked to create that implementation guide. And that is a great roadmap for agencies beginning into the BWC area, as well as agencies that want to review and evaluate how they've done. It's a reverse read as well. So doing that is incredibly important. So COPS work, IJIS has been critical on developing the technology and working with researchers to help identify that, as well as funding some of the smart policing body-worn camera work that have identified why we're seeing the effects we're seeing. So all areas that are really critical and really helpful for us. DHS obviously always working in these areas as well, so we appreciate their work. And we're looking at the future involvement of the Bureau of Justice Statistics as well. And because that's one of the critical aspects of measuring and research, is being able to build that national picture of how these are being implemented and how well they're being used, and what the effective impact is. So I'm going to stay as short as I can and turn it over. I believe Paul, or Assistant Chief Figueroa, is going to step in and really talk about the work that's going and been happening around the area. So thank you for the time again, and I will be here for the questions after the event. Assistant Chief.
Great. Good morning, everyone. We are having a sunny, beautiful day here in California, so I hope others are enjoying the same type, although we would definitely take some rain out here if anyone wants to send it our way, given the long drought we've been going through. But so greetings from California. Thank you for allowing me to participate. I think as we look across the country, this is one of the areas where this kind of conversation has to happen on a regular basis, and I'll get into why a little bit later. Why it's so critical for all of us. But I wanted to start with just basically giving a very quick overview of just some of Oakland's history, and the next slide will outline some high-profile incidents. And if you Oakland's got a reputation around the country, high crime, a lot of things. Hopefully, with the Warriors win and for having good sports and things like that. But it's not always good. We've had Black Panther Party came out of Oakland. That was in response to some police abuses of the time, and a real response to what was seen as a system that was built towards the repression of an entire group of people in African Americans in Oakland. And so there's the Sudanese Liberation Army, which was really focused on prison reform at the time, and some of the other things that were going on in the community at the time. And we could look at other civil rights movements all the way to the days of to what we currently see with the Black Lives Matter movement. And all of those things, many were fueled by very high-profile incidents that were taking place, where allegations were made against the police, and there just wasn't a lot of data to show what happened, and there was not a lot of faith that the police were making the right decisions and doing the right things. In the late 1990s, on the next slide here, you'll see that we entered into what we call the Writer's Consent Decree, and it was a group of 4 officers on the graveyard shift, late 90s, that went around and during the night in the graveyard shift, it was alleged they were involved in the civil rights violations of individuals, a number of individuals. There was a lot of use of force involved in those cases. And through that process, the officers actually got charged and went to trial twice. The first jury hung on a number of charges, and then they went to trial again. It was actually the longest jury deliberation in the history of California, interestingly, in that case. So it just shows you how complex these are and how complex it was for us. Ultimately, in the civil case, $11 million was paid out to 119 complainants. And then it led to a negotiated settlement agreement, which is basically, it has the same power as a consent decree for us. So we can just think about it in terms of the consent decree. And the next slide, I list the 9 areas of the consent decree covers. Pretty basic stuff. You'll see this around the country and other areas that are dealing with consent decrees, from internal affairs to use of force to early warning systems, which we'll talk about in a little bit, training, compliance, all that. And then the last item was use of camcorders. I don't think they call them camcorders anymore, but that was what they were talking about. And the next slide talks about what it gives the actual language from our negotiated settlement agreement. And it says, OPD shall explore the use and cost effectiveness of camcorders in patrol vehicles. So at the time, that was kind of the prevailing technology. We did have some. We did try some out, but nothing really took off for us. And so it was a good thing that we began to see some of this body-worn camera technology kick in as we struggled to implement. So the next slide talks about the goals and the reason it was in the consent decree and why it's important for all of us on the call to kind of understand the context of not only how Oakland got here, but how other agencies can get here as well. And so the goals of the cameras are to increase accountability, to provide evidence to disprove or prove allegations of misconduct, and then to really document the circumstances of why and how the force was used, and capture it in a way that could be kind of definitive proof of what took place in that event, or at least definitive from the angle that the camera is recording it. The next one, there are a couple other benefits that we found. Is we record victim witness statements with them. There's a few exceptions to that, but generally we're able to record statements, and it's really, really well. We've actually solved, this year we solved a homicide based on the use of an officer's body-worn camera. When they got to the scene, there was a lot of spontaneous statements being made, and there was some recanting that was taking place later. But the body-worn camera footage was actually the key piece of evidence that was able to prove that case definitively, and it had a lot to do with the spontaneous statements that were being recorded. So significant benefits of that. Significant benefits to documenting evidence. Officers are very careful now to, they actually take the camera and will make sure they at least get the scene and layout on the camera. So there's a very deliberate efforts to do that, which is having very positive impacts for us. When we look at there's a U.S. Department of Justice survey that came out in the July of 2015, and it was based on some previous surveys that had happened, but at the time, in 2013, the local police agencies showed about 68% used in-car video, 32% of local departments used body-worn camera footage. I'm going to bet that number is going to flip. The vast majority of agencies, I think, will be using body-worn camera only because it's more versatile, and it can go it's portable. It can go in homes and many of those other places that the in-car cameras just can't do. Certainly there are some advantages to in-car cameras that body-worn cameras can't do, but I think, if you're looking for bang for your buck, you want to go body-worn camera first, and then you can supplement that with some of the wider angle in-car stuff that can be used during pursuits and things like that. So the next slide I want to move in, that's just, I did that for background and just give you a sense of where Oakland came from. But my encouragement and challenge to all of us who are engaged in this is really to look at body-worn cameras as a wealth of data for improvement. And, there's just so many ways we can use it and engage the information. So some of the challenges we went through in the new program was really getting through the policy formulation and implementation. So we've had them since about 2010, and there'll be a slide that captures that later. But we struggle, right? Like everyone else, you know, when do we release video? Victim rights, victim privacy versus freedom of information. And then that's on the release side, and then on the officer side, the staffing side, is who can view them and when can they view them. In Oakland, they can view the body-worn camera footage anytime they want prior to completing a report, with the exception of, for example, an officer-involved shooting. It's what we call level 1 use of force. So force that's likely to cause death or serious bodily injury, that would be what we consider a level 1. And the way we do, and what we do there is we'll take an officer's statement. Right after that statement, they're allowed to watch the video, and then they can come back in and give another statement and say, I didn't see that, I saw this, oh, now I remember this. And so they're given a chance to, you know, use the video, and it's not considered lying or, you know, providing false testimony, things like that, because, you know, we recognize the camera's going to capture a lot of stuff that we don't always capture in those critical type incidents. So that's our policy in Oakland, and that was something we struggled through to even reach that point. A lot of negotiation with our representation, the unions that represent the officers, things like that went on. So we struggled with that, and I know other agencies around the country are. Some of the other challenges are cost, right? Cloud storage is pretty expensive, and hopefully that costing gets better. But the thing for us, we developed our program, and the project for us has been under $1 million over 5 years. I think it's about $820,000 total for 5 years. That includes cameras and storage. We house the video in-house, so we have our own servers that store the video versus the cloud. We may move to the cloud at some point, but we're still working on that, and in terms of where we want to go and how we want to do it. So we're actually pretty proud of the fact that we've been able to keep our costs down pretty significantly for an agency our size. I know some are looking at paying over $1 million a year for the projects and startup costs and things like that. So there are ways to do it in a way that aren't super cost prohibitive, but there's no question that there's a lot of costs associated with this. And then there's training and transition is another challenge, right? So we have to get everyone trained, and then we have to train those that are already working, so we have to retrain the muscle memory for them and transition them into the equipment. And that's taken some time. Sometimes they'll forget to turn it on, activate it, but we're getting much better at that now that it's becoming it's been part of our culture for so long. One of the things we found was really important is we actually assign units to the recruits upon entry into the academy. So it's all they know. They use it in the academy, they activate it when they need to, they turn it off when they need to, and when they hit the field, a lot of that muscle memory is there, and it'll be kind of all they've known in their time. There are the next slide. There's awareness of the limitations, right? We all have to be aware of that. There's nighttime, low light. There's sound limitations. There's malfunctions to the devices. All of that can occur. Then there's the system and upgrade storage issues, right, are challenges as well, where, you know, we were able to, and pretty much by force of consent decree, had to develop our own system. It worked out well for us, but you know, it was still quite a bit of a challenge. We're struggling with the question of, do we want to move to the cloud or not? There's a huge fear of cost overruns, and then at the end of it, there's the control of the end product, the data security, walled system, who gets copies, who don't. Who doesn't get copies, and so we end up spending a lot of time on that. Let's see the next slide. So in 2009, you can see on the slide, we were not using them, and use of force incidents were in the mid 2000s, and then they dropped significantly since then. So it's about a 70% drop from 2009 to through 2014. Those numbers are holding as well in this year, that same level of drop. And in 2010, we had just under 200 deployed, and then in 2014, just over 650. And we also have replacements available when officers need them, and they'll check them out. So we did some other things too. I don't want to say that the effects of body-worn camera were in a vacuum. We changed our foot pursuit policies. We changed our vehicle pursuit policies. We changed how the SWAT team operates when they go to scenes. We do surround and call out versus dynamic entry. There were a lot of other things that kicked in as well, but I think if you were to look at a crisp date at the department and when things got rolled out, you can really see a number of things. The one blip in the complaints, there definitely was a downtrend. That was a year there was a number of protests in Oakland, and there was a lot of complaints that year for that. So that kind of accounts for that, the high-profile events that were the blip there. So one of the things that we've talked about a lot on the next slide is the hypothesis that the civilizing effect, as Dr. White will call it shortly, but it's people behave differently when they know they're being recorded, us and them. So it's both of us, and I think that does definitely have an effect when that is occurring. I do know there's some recent research out there where people were asked if they knew they were being recorded by the police, and a pretty significant amount of them said they didn't realize they were being recorded. So there may be some pushback on that eventually when more research is done on it, and maybe the good doctor can talk about that next or in his presentation. So we're looking into that, but a lot of us do feel that it does have some effect on people, because I mean we have examples we can point to where people were very elevated and very challenging, and then when the video camera comes on, they're questioning, hey, am I being recorded now? And they see it being recorded. So it definitely has some of those advantages. So what's next? What's next? And this is the part that I get super excited about. And the current state is that we definitely are looking at, right now we use body-worn camera, and this is on the next slide. We use body-worn camera footage to look at high-profile incidents. So for the officer-involved shootings, other things that we get all the Freedom of Information requests for. We look at use of force incidents, complaints, and lawsuits, and that's generally how we're using data, using the footage right now. But I challenge us to look at it from a different way, and the next slide shows that at the end of the day, this is fundamentally data. It is a bunch of zeros and ones and recorded frames and all kinds of stuff, pictures, documentation of what happened. And it has significant implications for performance management and performance assessment systems. We can look at officers, how they're interacting with people on a daily basis, and it gives us a chance to give them feedback on their performance, how they're doing, provide them additional training if we need to, and then if they're following training and policy, maybe there's something wrong with that, and maybe we need to fix that. And so it's just thousands and thousands of hours of data that we miss oftentimes because we're only looking at those high-profile events that take place, and that's true across the country right now. There's not a real systematic review of it taking place. I want to talk a little bit about our performance management early warning system as a part of our consent decree. We have, we have had a system that looks at exemplary performance as well as areas for improvement. So there's certain triggers. There's 40-plus triggers that we look at: vehicle pursuits, we look at awards, we look at promotions, we look at uses of force, you name it. Types of complaints they're getting. Are there any patterns within those? And there's a trigger system which will kick off if we see any areas that are very concerning to us. And what we're able to do with the body-worn cameras footage, which is great, is we're able to go back and look more in depth at the officers' interactions with the community. We also use something called the risk management meeting here in Oakland, and it's where we discuss performance data of our staff. It's very similar to the CompStat model, where we look overall. The commanders is sitting at the table, and we're looking at overall complaints in the area, the types of enforcement they're doing, and a lot of times that information we're able to dig into it more by looking at the quality of their stops and asking the commanders about how they're managing their staff and training them to have positive interactions with the community. So we're using it in that form as well at a much higher policy level. We're also using it for the, we collect data, stop data information, racial profiling information. California, just last week, the governor signed a bill which is going to require the state to turn this information in to the Attorney General's office once a year. And we look at stops by race, reasons for the stop, actions during the stop, and the results of the stop, and a whole number of other categories. In Oakland, we have been capturing this data for many, many years now. And you know, it's a key part of accountability for agencies moving forward. Right now, if we wanted to get a full picture of why an officer chose to stop somebody and conduct searches, or that kind of look at their pre-post decisions. Well, you know, well, this officer is stopping 80% of people they stop are of one race, and they're searching 40% of those individuals, and they're not. And when they search them, their recovery rate is not high. So those are kinds of things that we look at through our risk management process and through the management process here. And so we ask those questions. And to get answers to why officers are doing stops, why and looking at performance, there may be totally justifiable reasons why that officer is stopping individuals at these certain percentages and not finding much. It might be due to their assignment. Maybe they're working the transport wagon where they search everyone that gets in the wagon and there's nothing found, or they're responding or dealing with certain kinds of situations that they're just not going to find much. And so it doesn't always mean something's wrong. It just means we should look at it and really try to get in. Are we being as fair as we can to our community, and are we using our resources to reduce crime in the most efficient fashion? So right now it's a very cumbersome process. We have to search a lot of different systems, look at a lot of different documents. So for example, we have to look in one system to figure out, okay, well, who are the officers that I should be looking at, right? What are the percentages of stops, and you know, who's stopping certain races at certain high percentages? And then we have to go to the document system and look at the police report, the field investigation report, and then we have to drill down from there, and then look into another system to look at the stop data footage and the body camera footage to figure out kind of what's going on. It's very, very cumbersome for supervisors and commanders. So I want to get into a solution, which is my next slide here. And we are creating, partnered with our vendor, Forensic Logic, to put all of the data in one database and link the body-worn camera footage to it, all in one place, to make this a very practical solution and integrate it with our body-worn camera footage so that supervisors and commanders, as we're managing our staff, can go to one place and look at these percentages, see what we're interested in, and drill down and be able to get to that information right at their fingertips, from reports to body-worn camera footage. So the next slide is a picture of the dashboard. It's a lot bigger, so I apologize. It's kind of a screen capture on the screen here. I'm going to get into each one of these blocks now, so you'll get a better chance to see them. So the next slide, the first one we see is it can drill down by, let's just say I'm a supervisor or I'm a lieutenant, and I have all these different areas under my command. And I'm looking for a specific type of stop that officers are doing. So say I want to look at it by race. On the next slide, you'll see that we can drill down by race, right? And so it'll say, I think, trying to read my screen here, just over 50% of the stops of the groups that we saw on the last slide were African American. So I can also drill down. I can click on that box as well, and in the next slide, it will give me the gender of those stopped in the African American category that I clicked on. And so I'm trying to get a better sense of the patterns of the type of activity my officers are involved in. The next box, I say, okay, now I want to drill down into one of those groups, male or female, and I want to say, you know, what are the search results? When we conduct searches, are we finding things? Because searches represent a significant intrusion on the freedoms of others, and we really want to make sure that when we make that decision, not only are we not prolonging the stop too long, but are we being effective in that strategy of choosing the search at that time. And then we can look at, I can click on, okay, well, I'm really interested in saying, just looking right now at the searches that have no results and finding in the search, I can click on that box and it would bring me to those types of searches that didn't result in anything. And as we can see here in this example, probation and parole searches were the highest percentage. Incident to arrest search was the next, and we go down from there. I can even drill down even further and look at each one of those categories even more, and then you can keep drilling down in that. In this next slide, let's say I'm interested in some particular officers. Once again, by race, I can click on the box that is highlighted in red, and it will bring me, and go to the next slide. When you click on the box, you also have the option of looking at all of the reports, recordings, footage, anything filled out, the call for service, you name it, related to everything that resulted in that box that I clicked above. So, like I said, we were interested in the stops of African Americans, in those where there was no recovery. All of those now that I've drilled down, all of those events, stops of African Americans where there was no recovery, are now here, and it's linked to the body-worn camera footage. So I can actually look at the stop, I can look at the reports, and basically take a look at what's happening there. So that's really where body-worn camera footage can be very, very helpful in the overall risk management for the organization. So the next slide, there's a few types of analysis that we're looking at. And I'll speed up here for the webinar presenters here if I'm taking too long here. Step one is basically our supervisors right now look at about 5 videos per month of officers, and they're basically looking for service quality, policy, compliance review of activities, and they can even look at some pre and post training analysis, which is key. So if you have an officer having issues with how they're communicating with individuals during stops, you can give them some training. You can analyze their stops before the training. You can analyze their stops after the training using the body-worn camera footage, and really come up with whether it's effective or not, and whether there's some recommendations, additional training that should take place. So that's happening now for us. We also use it to recognize officers who are engaged in exemplary performance. That typically comes out in the review boards we have for various events, but the body-worn camera footage is very helpful for that. On the next slide, there's a formal analysis that is capable with body-worn camera footage. There's a lot of projects underway right now to review larger amounts of data, so it's not just the smaller set of a supervisor looking at about 5 per week per officer. It's looking at, in Oakland, in our case, we're partnered with Stanford right now. They're looking at about 800 stops of footage right now, and doing some rigorous analysis of that. And so it's going to be the larger type report you're used to seeing from an academic institution. Those are nice because you do get the rigorous academic methodologies. It's very time consuming, as the next speaker can attest to, but very powerful at the same time, right? And it's nice because you can have a third party do it and get some really good feedback. And then the next slide is what I'm super excited about. So I'm excited about the basic analysis. I'm really excited about the formal analysis, but I'm super excited about the alternative. And there's an automated analysis capability that is beginning to be developed. And it's basically, when you look at what sergeants and lieutenants can look at by officer, 5 videos per month, then you look at the formal analysis. They're looking at these bigger numbers, these 800, the sample size of 800 videos, more rigorous. But we're still missing a lot of video. There's a lot of video and data that's out there and available that is not being looked at. So what Stanford is developing right now, and this technology, it's finally a feasible thing that we can do, is every time someone plugs their video in at the end of the shift, it gets uploaded and automatically analyzed. And reports can be given to supervisors. You can trigger on certain words. You can monitor if you're looking for certain performance indicators for officers. You can set all of that within there. And if you think about it, like a lot of us, when we call customer service, it says, this call is being monitored for customer service purposes. A lot of that analysis for those calls is already being done. So the technology is out there. And they look at words are placed in a scale. There's words of politeness. There's words of anger. There's all these different word scales out there that are used to analyze the audio portion of those calls. And so it's basically taking that technology. It's going to take some work, but it's feasible now and it's being done, and tweak that so that it can be used in the body-worn camera arena so that we can get some good quality feedback on our officers. Supervisors can get feedback on how their officers worked the day before, maybe the week before, however these monitoring systems you want to set up. On the next slide, I talk about, it's basically the goal. I think the long-term goal is to have these 3 levels of analysis: the basic, formal, and automated, and to use it for performance feedback and early warning systems, training, policy formulation. All those kinds of things are critical for us as we move forward. And like I said, I'm a big on training. I think that is key for law enforcement moving forward, and we have really missed the opportunity to date to go back and do some of that post-training and intervention analysis. And my final slide is the question we are working to answer at OPD, and I know that many around the country are, is how do we harness the technology in a manner to ensure we are more effective and accountable policing agency? And our goal is that what we develop should be shareable with other agencies, because agencies have been so good to OPD over the years, and especially as we were going through our reforms and people really opened their agencies up to us so we can learn how to be better ourselves, and we want to make that available to everyone else. And I will pass it to Dr. White at this point, who is going to get into his presentation.
Thanks, Assistant Chief Figueroa. It should be clear to everyone on the webinar now that the Chief just has a tremendous amount of knowledge on this technology, both individually and then also the Oakland Police Department. So really, they're one of the early adopters, and the experiences they have had are really, I think, very valuable for the thousands of police departments that are now moving in this direction. So thanks, Chief. I'm Michael White. I'm a professor in the School of Criminology and Criminal Justice at Arizona State University, and I'm also the new co-director of Training and Technical Assistance for BJA's pilot implementation program of body-worn cameras, and I'll get more into that in a little bit. So for my presentation, there are really 4 general areas that I want to cover, and a lot of what I'm going to talk about is more at a 30,000-foot level than what the Chief was talking about in his presentation. First, I want to get into the issues that have been raised with this technology. A number of claims have been made by advocates and critics regarding body-worn cameras and their impact, so I think it's useful to lay all those claims out on the table, and then second, to take a look at what the empirical evidence says about those claims. And that'll be the majority of my presentation. But I do want to spend some time talking about resources that are available for agencies considering this technology, and I want to highlight, as Mike Rusa said earlier, the National Body-Worn Camera Toolkit that has been put together by DJA, and then also talk about some next steps and where things are going in the future. So that's my presentation in a nutshell. So at the next slide, though, I think it's useful to take a step back before getting into the issues and the evidence, and just think a little bit historically about where we've gone in the last several years. And this hits on a couple of the points that Mike raised in his introductory remarks. There's a lot on this slide. You can digest this at a later point. Really, there are 2 takeaway messages I want you to get from this slide. The first is that law enforcement interest in body-worn cameras dates back several years. A lot of people think about August 2014, the death of Michael Brown in Ferguson, as kind of the starting point for body-worn cameras. And for law enforcement, that's not the case. As far back as 2005, some agencies in the UK were experimenting with the technology, and we just heard Assistant Chief Figueroa talking at length about the relatively long experience that Oakland has had with body-worn cameras. So the line in the sand really in August of 2014 in Ferguson, what happened after Ferguson, I think, is that political interest, public interest, and media interest in body-worn cameras really exploded. But law enforcement interest was established before that. The second takeaway message from this slide really involves the tremendous amount of support for body-worn cameras at the federal level. You can see it's part of President Obama's plan to strengthen community policing. We'll talk a little bit about the National Body-Worn Camera Toolkit. But the U.S. Department of Justice has a number of funding mechanisms available to provide money to agencies in support of this technology. And in particular, I want to highlight what happened last month in September 2015. BJA has created a pilot implementation program, and just a few weeks ago, they announced awards to 73 law enforcement agencies, totaling $19.3 million for the purchase and deployment of body-worn cameras. So a lot of support at the federal level, and that pilot implementation program will be continuing in the next few years. So one more on the next slide, one more business item before getting into the issues and the research. Given the time constraints for this presentation, a lot of what I'm going to talk about will be fairly descriptive and superficial. If you have an interest in exploring these issues in greater detail, I wrote a report for the Department of Justice that came out last year, the Assessing the Evidence report. That report will it delves into the issues that I'm talking about now in much greater detail. And if you just Google Assessing the Evidence, you can look at that report. And like I said, it provides much more detail on some of these issues. So on the next slide, I want to talk a little bit about the research that's been conducted on body-worn cameras. And when I wrote the Assessing the Evidence report last year, the 5 studies that you see on this slide represented the entire body of knowledge on police body-worn cameras. And you can see there are a couple of studies from the UK. Unfortunately, they were fairly weak in terms of methodology, so not a lot they can tell us. But 3 important early studies in the US have given us some direction on the impact and consequences of body-worn cameras. The Rialto study, Mesa, Arizona, and Phoenix, Arizona. And I'll talk about each of those in greater detail. There has been some additional work in the last year or so. In particular, the University of South Florida has been working with the Orlando Police Department, and they just released some results from their study. Some additional work coming out of Phoenix and out of Rialto. And then a number of departments have made available the results of internal studies, internal reports that have been done. We just heard about Oakland, San Diego is another example. So a small body of research, but it's growing very quickly, and I'll come back to this at the end of my presentation about the number of studies that are underway. So I think at this point, let's transition and talk a little bit about those issues and the evidence. So on this slide, what you see are, in my view, the primary perceived benefits of police body-worn cameras. And I created a legend at the bottom to indicate, in my opinion, the current state of empirical evidence supporting each of these claims. And you see lots of squiggly lines and lots of question marks, and I'll come back to that. But basically, the takeaway from this slide is that there's a few studies have documented some preliminary, very compelling findings, but we need more research. And just to hit the highlights real quick, in terms of these benefits, I think most of the people on the webinar recognize these: increased transparency and legitimacy. Assistant Chief Figueroa mentioned the civilizing effect, so that's the next 2, changing behavior of police officers, changing behavior of citizens. And the evidence on the civilizing effect is interesting because as I'll get into in a couple of minutes, several of these studies have documented fairly large drops in complaints against officers and use of force, which would be suggestive of a civilizing effect. But at least in terms of citizens, think about what has to happen for a citizen to change his or her behavior based on the presence of a camera. One, the citizen has to know that the encounter is being recorded And then two, the citizen has to be able to think rationally about the implications of that recording. And as most of us know, police frequently deal with citizens who are not able to think rationally, I guess is the best way to say that. So we can get into that a little bit more in the question and answer. Some of the other benefits obviously deal with the evidentiary value of the video, both for complaints and for prosecution. So like I said, more research needed, but let's take a look in the next slide at some of the findings coming out of these early studies. And most people are familiar with the Rialto study. It's gotten a lot of attention, and it's gotten a lot of attention for good reason. It's a very rigorous study, randomized controlled trial, organized by the chief of the Rialto department, and you can see the findings. And the findings, I think, are what has drawn a lot of attention. You see really extraordinary drops in citizen complaints against police and use of force by police after the officers began wearing body-worn cameras. And these are one-year findings. The chief has presented the year 2 findings, and the results are much the same. You can see the numbers are fairly small in terms of complaints and use of force, but still really impressive declines in these important outcomes for police. The Mesa, Arizona Police Department did their own study with some help from Arizona State University, and you can see that the Mesa study replicated the Rialto findings with regard to the drops in complaints and the drops in use of force. The other piece of the Mesa study that was interesting was the administrative policy question. So the Mesa study lasted about a year, and for the first 6 months of the project, the Mesa officers operated under a fairly restrictive administrative policy. They didn't have much discretion. They were supposed to activate the camera basically during any formal contact with a citizen. The second 6 months of the study, the department loosened up the policy and gave officers much more discretion. And what they found was that under the more discretionary policy, the number of reported encounters, the number of activations declined substantially. So that points to the importance of the administrative policy. I'll mention the Las Vegas study. They are describing one outcome in an interesting way that I hadn't considered until I heard the lieutenant present this over the summer. And they're counting the number of officers who are exonerated from complaints because of immediate review of body-worn camera evidence. And actually, I heard the lieutenant present last week or 2 weeks ago in Detroit, and that number now is above 60. So an interesting way to capture the impact of body-worn cameras. On the next slide, we see some of the findings from the Phoenix evaluation. We can see in Phoenix, not quite as large, but you can see again declines in citizen complaints. So that appears to be the most consistent and powerful finding from the rollout of body-worn cameras, is this decline in complaints against officers. And you can see in Phoenix that officers who were not wearing body-worn cameras actually experienced increases. Phoenix also looked at daily arrest activity. I know there's some concern that officers will become less aggressive or less proactive when wearing cameras. I heard the term going fetal recently. No evidence of that in any of the departments that I've worked in, and you can see in Phoenix actually arrest activity increased. Phoenix was also interested in the evidentiary value of body-worn cameras for domestic violence cases, and you can see from the bullets on this slide that across a number of measures, domestic violence cases that had body-worn camera video had enhanced outcomes, more likely to be charged, more likely to result in guilty plea and guilty verdicts at trial. And that represents, I think, one of the first examinations of the impact of body-worn cameras on downstream criminal justice processing. Okay, on the next slide, we can flip the switch a little bit and talk about some of the other issues that are of concern. So the perceived concerns with body-worn cameras. And you can see that there's some plus signs here with the legend, so I think the evidence is a little more robust with the concerns. The big concern is privacy, and there are two dimensions to that, officer privacy, obviously, and citizen privacy. And the citizen privacy issue involves a number of different things. One big issue is a citizen's expectation of privacy during the encounter that's being recorded. But the other element of citizen privacy is It involves requests for public records, who can view the video, who can make a request for video, what needs to be redacted before a video is released. And the other concerns involve the tremendous amount of resources, manpower, and staffing that are required to start and successfully manage a body-worn camera program, the training policy requirements, the cost, particularly for data storage. So these are the concerns. And then on the next slide, I talk about some of the other issues that have that I've heard raised over the last 9 to 12 months that are causing some concern. And Assistant Chief Figueroa discussed this first one, whether or not officers should be able to review video prior to report writing and making statements. And the really contentious issue here involves officer-involved shootings. Should officers be allowed to review the video before they make statements after an officer-involved shooting? I mentioned briefly the public records issues in terms of redaction, in terms of privacy, and state law really comes into play here, and this becomes a real issue with states who have very broad and vague public records laws, such as the state of Washington. Legislative mandates. Over the summer, there were more than 30 states that were considering some form of legislation involving body-worn cameras. Some of those legislative bills mandated wear for every officer in a state. Some were very specific. For example, the state of Nevada passed a law over the summer that basically said a person making a public records request can only request one video at a time. So some of the laws have gotten really very specific in terms of the issues with body-worn cameras. On the next slide, a couple of other issues to think about. The prosecutor buy-in issue is exceptionally important. Prosecutors need to be engaged at the very start of this process because the rollout of body-worn cameras has a tremendous impact on the prosecutor's office. They have to deal with all of this evidence that's coming in, so they need to be involved in the process from the start. Mike mentioned the expert panel at the White House that BJA had put together in February. The loudest voices in the room about body-worn cameras involved the prosecutors and the concerns that they had. And you can see that I mentioned the Phoenix study earlier, focusing on domestic violence case processing. And I mentioned the positive outcomes with regard to those cases if body-worn camera video was available. On this slide, you see kind of the side effect, though. The cases that had body-worn camera video took twice as long to process. The last concern to mention is the activation compliance. So what will departments do when officers are not routinely complying with their administrative policy about when they should activate the camera? On the next slide, we see, or the next two slides, we'll see some of the results from Phoenix looking at activation compliance. And you can see in Phoenix, during their study, compliance peaked at 42% and trailed off considerably. So this slide is basically telling you that in a majority of the cases, officers in Phoenix were in fact not complying with administrative policy regarding when to turn the camera on. And the next slide, we can see this by call type. And you can see that domestic violence calls had the highest compliance rates, almost reaching 50%. And you can see by call type compliance really tailing off considerably by the different types of incidents. Switching gears a little bit and focusing on the research, focusing on the resources rather that are available, I do want to highlight the National Body-Worn Camera Toolkit. Mike had mentioned the website earlier. You can see it on this slide. The toolkit has been available since May. And as Mike mentioned, the toolkit really started back in February with BJA's two-day expert panel that was held at the White House. Over 100 experts across a range of disciplines were invited for this two-day brainstorming session on body-worn cameras. And you can see the picture. Myself and a colleague from ASU, Dr. Chuck Katz, facilitated this session. And this two-day expert panel served as the foundation for the toolkit. The information that was called from the experts really serves, as I said, as the anchor point for the toolkit. And then over the next several months, myself and Dr. Katz worked very closely with Mike and BJA to create the content for the toolkit. And the toolkit is it's an information warehouse on body-worn cameras. It's a place for anyone to go to learn everything they might want to know about the technology, whether you're a chief of police, whether you're a civil rights attorney, whether you're a concerned citizen or a reporter in the media. And you can see the different content areas. So if we go to the next slide, you can see this is the kind of the main page of the toolkit. And you can see across the top, you've got the main areas: research, policy, technology. And on the next slide, you can see that the toolkit is organized in a FAQ format. So when you click a particular area, so for example, here's the getting started area, you see question, frequently asked questions. You click on a question, and then there's a drop-down that provides information resources on that particular question. The toolkit also has a number of podcasts throughout the different areas. So in the getting started area, we see there's a podcast from the director of BJA, Denise O'Donnell. Just a couple of other quick looks. On the next slide, we can see the image for a law enforcement implementation checklist. And we work to create kind of a step-by-step guide for agencies that are planning and deploying a body-worn camera program. And the law enforcement implementation checklist is designed essentially to show the agencies that are starting this process all the issues that they should be thinking about. If we could flip the slide, you can see the law enforcement implementation checklist. Okay, we may be having some issues with the technology. There we go. So you can see at least the first page of the checklist. And then on the next slide, you can see another example of one of the content areas. This is the training area, and this shows you what happens. You click on the question, and then it gives you additional detail with regard to that particular FAQ. Two final points I want to make before closing out and turning it over. There are a number of other important resources that are available that are listed on the next slide. We heard from, I think it was Mike mentioned, the Cops Office Perf report that came out last year, a very valuable report that delves into a lot of the policy issues that are important in this area. NIJ 2 years ago did a market survey comparing and contrasting the primary vendors and their products. And then, of course, there are a number of model policies, administrative policies that come out, IACP, ACLU. Most of this information can be accessed independently. It's also available in the toolkit. So the last thing I wanted to mention, so what's next? Final thoughts and moving forward. Paul had mentioned the BJS results, and from 2013, it appeared that almost a third of police departments indicated that they had deployed in some fashion body-worn cameras, and I agree with Assistant Chief Figueroa. I think that number has increased considerably. Thousands of agencies are going it alone, but many agencies are partnering with researchers, either on their own or because of funded research, to evaluate the impact of the technology. As Mike said, NIJ is funding a number of studies, in particular in Las Vegas and in Los Angeles. The Laura and John Arnold Foundation has also provided funding to a number of researchers to study body-worn cameras. And then also I mentioned the pilot implementation program that BJA is managing, and originally it was going to be 50 agencies, but they were able to fund 73. And of course, BJA also manages the Smart Policing Initiative, which is funding sites on body-worn cameras. So a lot of things going on, a lot of excitement, and I think the research evidence is going to improve considerably over the next year. So that's all I have. Thank you. And I guess at this point, I'll turn it over to Ashwini.
Thanks, Dr. White. I'll quickly give an industry's perspective on what's happening from the body-worn camera market. Quickly, as agencies are looking to procure the body-worn camera, we know there are a lot of good technology behind the scene that has been incorporated into this body-worn camera. But also at the same time, now we're seeing a new players coming into this market who are actually providing not just the equipment, but also are looking into how to actually work behind the scenes in bringing the technology together that supports the video technology, and also at the same time, how the video technology can be incorporated into the different systems that actually will utilize the videos that is being collected. And at the same time, how we can actually discuss some of the policy challenges that exist and technology can support that. So one of the challenges that we have been working at the IJIS Institute in partnership with ISCP is to look at the policy aspect, is how the policy challenges that exist within the agency in deploying these new latest and greatest technology can be applied, and how they can be leveraged by the technical solution. So on the next slide, as we all know that we have seen challenges with the license plate reader technology. Again, the same challenges exist for the body-worn camera technology. It's another video technology that's actually subject to same scrutiny as ALPR. But the good news is that now we actually have worked collectively with ISCP and with the solution providers who are actually providing the similar type of technology for body-worn camera to address some of the challenges that agencies have been facing when it came to ALPR. So some of the things that we are also dealing with from industry's perspective is the whole issue around the data management, as Assistant Chief was talking about, Dr. White was talking about, is the cloud technology. It's collecting the data, whether you're housing the data within your agency or you're housing it in the cloud environment, how you're going to do the integration, how you're going to share that with other solutions that you have within agencies. So the big thing that different solution providers are looking at, especially the system integrators working with body-worn camera technology providers, is the whole concept of the data management. And some of the data management issues that we came across in the license plate reader are very much applicable to the body-worn camera, and things that we have been looking at is how you ensure that there's an appropriate use of the data that's being collected and shared, how you're going to secure and protect the data, and especially now we have a whole lot of data with the video on top of everything else we're collecting, how you're going to address some of the policy challenges and unauthorized use. And as you can see, these are some of the examples that are part of data management, but are also part of the whole policy challenges that have to be addressed as part of the body-worn camera technologies gets rolled out. But at the same time, the biggest issue we are also going to face, and the solution providers are looking into it, is the whole digital evidence issue, is that how you basically ensure the quality of the data you're collecting, and ensure that as the chain of custody changes from law enforcement to the courts and through the criminal life cycle, how you're going to actually ensure the whole digital evidence life cycle. So that's the other thing that need to be addressed as part of the body-worn camera rollout. But the good news is that now ISCP have a policy technology framework that we know that based on the Police Chief magazine, that over 60% agencies are now using this framework. So the thing is that there's a model policy that can be leveraged that was drafted for license plate reader and other technologies that can be leveraged for the body-worn camera technology. So like license ALPR, the technology industry is willing to support the agencies and the practitioner or practice association on how to take the policies and apply them and ensure the proper use of the video that's being collected in the different data sets. Then on the next slide, one of the things which I want to share with everybody is the whole concept of what we have been talking is the data management concept, because it's applicable to everything that we do from the technology perspective. We're collecting a lot of data. Video is another form of data, but the challenge that we have to address is the governance. So the same governance might apply to the body-worn camera data that's being collected or not. If it does not apply, then one of the things that industry providers have to also look at is that within their solutions, how the data ownership, the data governance can be incorporated from technology perspective. There's a human factor to this where agencies have to put their own governance around the data, but also there are things that can be incorporated into the technology when it comes to collecting the data and sharing the data. So as part of that, some of the challenges that we have heard from the solution providers and the practice associations is that the whole architecture that needs to be supported as we're getting into more video data collection, how the video interoperability fits in, how the different analysis tools can support the video that we're collecting. So these are some of the things that industry is actively exploring to support the agencies as they move forward in deploying the body-worn camera technology. Then on the next slide, as part of the overall data management concept, the big issue is also the data maintenance issue, because irrespective of where your data is housed, we have to address the integrity of the data, how the data is being administered, who has access to it, and what kind of technology we're supporting. And on top of that, the data we're collecting, if they're in different formats, can we make that interoperable so it's easy to share within the proper guidance? And also at the same time, how we actually protect the data which we're collecting. And the privacy and the security is the core component as we move forward in collecting more video data and also integrating with the different solutions like record management system. If there's an incident and now we have to tag the videos and also now link the video to the data in the record management system, how that process is gonna work, how we're gonna ensure that once it's part of that record, that who's accessing. So the auditing and security have to be put in place for this body-worn camera videos that are being collected. Then along the same lines on the next slide, the key component and the lesson learned for the law enforcement agencies over the past few years with the technology provider is the data quality. One of the big things that is going to be very helpful that if we start thinking about how we're going to address the data quality issue as we're collecting the different videos from different solution providers, where it's being housed, and what that baseline standard needs to look like. So we are not facing the same challenges that we have faced in the past with the different technologies when it comes to the data quality issue. So that's very important as we move into the data integration piece, because that is going to be happening as we are collecting the video and incorporating that, whether it's with the record management system or any other application that law enforcement agencies will be using or procuring for purposes like analytics. So those are the things that has to be addressed as the overall life cycle of data management. On the next slide, also which is important, as you heard Assistant Chief and Dr. White talk about the cloud, irrespective of if the data is going to sit in the cloud or wherever it's going to be collected, that the business intelligence piece is the core component. That's where the value is. So as part of that, there needs to be some baseline capability defined, how that warehousing will work. And if it's not warehousing concept, then if it's being the information sharing concept that is being implemented, then we need to actually have some standards defined there so we can have a good business intelligence built into these applications. But also, we can easily solve some of the interoperability challenges by developing some of the standards. So when data is moving from one application to another, or if we have video in one format that needs to be now shared with others who actually have a different technology, and how we can now enable access to them following the proper privacy controls in place, has to be addressed as part of that big, so we can get the good business intelligence. So when Assistant Chief was showing all the metrics to demonstrate whether the technology is working, what are some of the challenges, and the value that this technology brings can be supported as part of the overall data management concept. And the last piece in the data management, which is also very important, is this whole notion of the identity management. Because as videos are being collected, it's not just about the public safety or the privacy of the citizens. It's also very important that we have all the right protocols in place and policies implemented to protect the privacy of the officers, because it is also about the officer safety. And above all, we have to make sure that with the whole challenge that we face in the cyber world with the cyber theft and all the cyber threats that we actually have a good strategy in place to protect this data and treat this data as our own agency's asset, so we can deploy the right policy, and the technology has to support that so we can protect these data assets so they don't fall into the wrong hand and we have other challenge on our hand. So to sum this up on the next slide is that we have to figure out a way to align policy with the technology. As we all know that with the technical innovation, the technology is moving really fast, that we actually have to figure out how to actually bring policy at a level, or we have some catch up to play here, that we actually put those policies that support the latest technical innovations like body-worn camera and the different format of videos that we're collecting. So as part of this move from policy to technology, that we have to figure out how we can actually create a community of interest that can get together to solve some of the challenges that exist in the realm of policy, but also how we can actually not only address the challenges of procurement as we are moving towards buying the body-worn camera, and as BJA has, you heard Dr. White talk about 73 agencies receiving $19 million, that how we can actually now take those funds, not only address the challenges of procuring the actual hardware, but also address the challenges that exist around the policy and asking questions like, do we have the policy, and are we ensuring if we have the policy that it's up to date? If we don't have it, the policy that's up to date, how we can leverage some of the model policies that exist, and how the technology industry can now support the incorporation of that policies into the actual application, so agencies can have the right metrics to support and demonstrate the value of this technology. And the good thing now we have in front of us is that we have a lot of lessons learned, as I mentioned in the beginning, from the license plate reader initiative, that we can actually now reuse and apply to this whole issue around the body-worn camera. And it's very important that industry and practice association have to collaborate to work collectively to address some of the challenges that we face in future with this technology. This technology also gives us a lot of opportunities, but also this technology has some challenges that we will be facing, and I believe that industry and practice association and with the law enforcement agencies collectively we can solve this problem. So from policy perspective, I will turn it over to Mike Rosa so he can talk about from the national perspective what's happening nationally with the body-worn cameras grants.
Great. Thanks again. As promised, a great group of experts in this field. I feel really lucky to be able to present with them. Well, I wanted to just make sure we filled in on where BJA and where the federal side is going. Certainly a basis in the President's 21st Century Task Force has a large call out for the transparency and improving community police relations in that area. So we did, as Dr. White mentioned, the pilot implementation program, which was about $20 million originally earmarked, ended up being a full amount of almost $23 million. And it provided $2 million for training and technical assistance, which is available to all body-worn camera, or all agencies for body-worn camera assistance. That's through CNA, and there'll be some information coming out in the near future for that, so stay aware of the Toolkit, as mentioned before, that website. Also on that was, as mentioned, 73 awards to agencies, and I really wanted to point out that we went from as small as a $9,000 award for 25 cameras to a $1 million award for 4,000 cameras. We saw a very good consistent average of about $1,100 per camera as a total program cost. That's not the cost of the camera itself, but that's the cost by the number of cameras for an overall program. So that was in the target range. We had identified 1,500, knowing that the flexibility in the market was still there. So we had a lot of good learning coming out of the solicitation. We received over 285 applications that were peer-reviewed by over 50 peer reviewers, which are local agency personnel from other staff or from other agencies from, again, the state, local level that do the peer review process for us. We identified these 73, and just to give you an idea of some of the successes, or that we feel will turn into the successes, the largest consortium we had of agencies was 9. We had 9 agencies that banded together to purchase and buy a unified system and work collaboratively. Every application that was funded had a clear, definite role around the prosecution of the effort, which was a call out inside of the solicitation. So if you're on the phone looking for maybe your agency applying for 2016, which we certainly hope to have that solicitation out based on funding, make sure you pay attention to those primary considerations. The prosecution, the technology, and the partnering are areas that we really want to focus on. But this is still a pilot. This is we are not dictating policy through this. We are ensuring that full policy development happens, but that full policy obviously represents the agency that it's for, not BJA. So we want to make sure that as we go through this next 2 years with these 73 agencies, that we learn the lessons as well as possible, and we stack those on top of the lessons, such as those from Assistant Chief Figueroa and the research from Dr. White and others, that we can continue to build an efficient, cost-benefit based process and program that actually returns an investment back to the agencies and the communities they support. So that's some of those facts, and I think we're going to jump into questions and answers next, and I'll let Don jump into that. But I just wanted to give those basic facts. That sheet, the award sheet, as well as the agencies that were awarded, are on the website, www.bja.gov/BWC. First page, go down to the first link, and you'll be able to see the fact sheet itself. But otherwise, I will turn it over to Don to get us into our questions and answers section. Thanks, guys.
Okay. Great. Thanks, everyone. So there were a couple questions about whether or not the presentation will be made available. The presentation is being recorded. It'll be posted probably sometime early next week on the IJIS website. It'll also be made available to the folks at BJA who I think are planning to put it online with their body-worn toolkit. So getting into some of the questions, we have a question: how do the policies address data governance changes as the data passes through the justice system? For example, when data is in possession of law enforcement, their policies belonging to that department, but when the data moves into the court system as evidence or otherwise, the policy must change to conform with what that corresponds to laws or regulations governing court records. So that's the question, sort of the gist of how policies address that data governance as it flows through the system.
So great, and this is Mike Rosa. I'll be glad to start this off because I think it has a little bit of an area for each of us to answer. The policy itself, video evidence has been being used in courts for decades. Again, as soon as cameras were invented, video was submitted as evidence. And there are processes that various courts, and this is always the difficulty in America itself, that there are different levels of technical ability. There are different points of view from the judicial perspective, from the prosecution perspective, as well as the law enforcement perspective. And this is why BJA and this program that we use isn't making or defining that as a final solution, because the technology has to catch up to provide the room for policy to be developed and to be coordinated together. So some of the best practices, and I think that's the area that we have to focus on, is which areas work well. I think those best practices, you're going to see flexible courts that are capable of handling the technology. You're going to see strong police and prosecution relationships where evidence is transferred electronically versus written to CD or thumb drive and only transferred through paper file and sneaker nets. So I think those are the primary areas, but maybe Ashwini, you want to touch a little bit on about the technology and how it could support the evidence and policy development.
Sure. Thanks, Mike. So one of the things is that what we are also looking from the technology perspective is what we the term used is secondary use, and also as the data moves from one agency. So one of the things we are looking at is that we know that agencies have developed the policies for other data sharing effort, and what this technology needs to look at is how we can leverage the policies that already exist from those kind of data sharing that can be leveraged as part of the body-worn camera. So if there's some automation on the policy side, like putting the audit controls, getting the right audit, putting the alerts if there's an who's using it, if there's an abuse, putting those kind of things in place, technology can support that. So that's part of the discussion that we're having as part of our law enforcement imaging technology task force, that even though it's a different type of technology, but it's still about the video, it's still about the data. So can we leverage and reuse the policies that are already in place when it comes to sharing the data and moving the data from one agency's systems to another agency?
Okay, great, thank you. So the next question we have, what are the most practical steps an agency can follow to reduce storage costs?
I'll start with this one again. I wish Assistant Chief Figueroa had to go actually to an advocacy meeting for body-worn camera video usage, so he's not available for the questions and answers. And if he gives some input on this question later, we'll be sure to attach it with the video. Oakland has done an amazing job of maintaining an internal system. And he'll correct me if I quote this wrong, but basically the gist of it is, having done it for 7 years, I believe they have around 700 cameras right now. Oakland hasn't broken $1 million yet. Now, is that the best practice technology implementation? Do they have the levels of redundancy that we expect for CJIS systems in those areas? You know, that's something you'd have to look internal to see. But to say it's possible is the first step. I believe that a lot of the costs we're seeing now are what I would call market hype, that are looking to leverage from a market perspective to maximize profit from a corporate perspective. As a former technologist myself, storage area network environments can be incredibly costly, depending on the level of redundancy and the level of availability that you feel is required for evidence, or I shouldn't even say evidence, for the practice at hand. Cloud environments provide a very, very nice alternative, because you can't just look at the cost of the storage itself. You have to look at the cost of maintaining an infrastructure. A fantastic storage area network with a very poor IT infrastructure basically means you have low availability and could have a devastatingly high cost when it comes to settlements for not being able to procure the video evidence required. So you have to balance the two of them, not just the dollar figure on the server, the hard drive, or even the cloud storage itself. You've got to balance the whole picture of the program itself on that. So that's really agency by agency. As I said, we saw pretty consistent. We saw some lower level costs ongoing, particularly for storage, and some higher level. And that's going to be the ongoing discussion as we see various markets, or I should say vendors or service providers, provide different levels of ability and different promises to that technology to make it more worthwhile, worth the spend. And then you have to still balance it against the return on investment. How many settlements do you reduce in a year if there's fewer complaints based on fewer uses of force, based on that aspect is a very good math to work into this equation. And Dr. White, I don't know if you have an area to hit on this, but I think it's a really important one of cost-benefit analysis.
Yeah, Mike, the only thing I would add with regard to the storage question, I mean, basically, you have one of two choices. Either you're going to manage it locally, or you're going to go with a vendor that provides a cloud storage solution. And, the cloud option right now is expensive. But 2 years ago, the cameras were over $1,000. So I think what's going to happen is, over the next couple of years, the cost of cloud-based storage is going to come down as the competition among vendors increases. And Oakland has done an excellent job managing the data locally at a reasonable cost. The Phoenix Police Department, also another large police department that chose to manage locally. If anyone is interested in connecting with Phoenix PD to ask some questions about how they manage locally, just send me an email and I'll connect you to the assistant chief in Phoenix, and he, like Assistant Chief Figueroa, is just a wealth of information on the kind of the nuts and bolts of this.
Okay, great. Two questions that seem sort of closely related, so I'll give them to you guys as sort of a 2-for-1. The first question is asking about manual engagement of the camera, and that seeming like a potential loophole. And the question is, should body-worn cameras be required to be on for an entire shift? And then sort of the sort of associated question is talking about there being a lot of case studies or studies that demonstrate there being just one view from the camera or one view of the event, potentially distorting the truth of what's being recorded. So the question is, how is that managed or mitigated? And their comment is that, you know, it seems as though it would be logical that the video evidence would have more weight than the oral testimony about circumstances that are occurring outside of the view of the camera.
So from a perspective of having worked with officers, the first thing to remember is you actually always have more than one point of view. The officer's point of view without the camera is a valid point of view, the same as the citizens. What the camera is doing is balancing those two and providing information to support either direction. So it really is important to identify it as just additional evidence to be considered. As Assistant Chief Figueroa mentioned, the officers, when it's a use of force or a Part 1 incident, level of force, it's not held that they have to remember every detail and the correct color and the correct sound and the correct number of shots fired even in a high tension environment. That's not held against them for getting it wrong. It's the idea that they give their best perspective there, and then all evidence is weighed. And that's the way our courts have always worked. So I'd say that side of it is very critical. The harder part, I think, is the first part of the question, is that what we're dealing is actually a technology limitation for why we wouldn't turn on cameras for an entire shift. First off, the maintenance of that much video would be next to impossible. The redaction of that much video would be next to impossible at this point. So as we continue to build technology and that openness happens, that's fine, but then we even work into the privacy considerations of what should the officer, when should the officer be turning them on for privacy concerns, not just for protections of the officer, but it's protections of the civil liberties. So really the technical gaps there are, to me, driving that inability, that the exposure, the risk, the other areas of too much video are there. You know, a lot of agencies delete video after a certain amount of time if no complaint has been made. So if it's an actual incident, the officer records it, say 3 months go by as a policy. If there is no request for that video after 3 months, they would delete that, more for the citizens' case than the police officers, just so that it's not something that's going to stay there forever to potentially ruin a life. I think one term was particularly around juveniles. You don't want young and dumb to create a stigma for their entire life where they can never get employment based on a single video that wasn't necessarily required to be maintained for that length of time. So those areas, I think, balance into that.
Yeah, this is Mike White. I could add to that, and I agree. It's just not reasonable to expect that cameras are going to be on for an entire shift. The departments that I've worked with, generally, officers on a 10-hour shift will record anywhere from 2.5 to 3.5 hours of video for a 10-hour shift, depending on what the officer does. But that's a pretty good estimate of the amount of video that's going to be recorded. And if you look at the perf cops document, they recommend that officers are given discretion in terms of when to activate, and departments vary a little bit on the degree of discretion. But this idea that officers should have no discretion in terms of when to turn it off, or when to turn it on and when to turn it off, I think most agencies are opposed to that, and most agencies will give their officers some discretion. Of course, the accountability piece is if an officer does not record or decides to record but then deactivate at some point, that officer is going to have to justify those decisions to his or her supervisor.
Okay, great, thank you. And I think we'll take one final question, and that question is about a CJIS compliance requirement. Is there going to be a CJIS compliance requirement, or can solutions be deployed without that?
CJIS is an interesting one. There are two terms for CJIS. You have the federal FBI-based APB, and I'm blanking on the name, but Advisory Policy Board, I believe, something along those lines, that creates official CJIS policy. They set security levels, they set review, redaction, all sorts of areas of control there. Then you have standard CJIS practices, so criminal justice information that isn't necessarily federally driven, but it comes with a lot of common sense to protection, because we're dealing often with PII information as well. So you definitely have to separate those two. There are, at this point, no official CJIS requirements for body-worn camera beyond what fits into that realm already. And I'll give an example of if an officer is in vehicle and the camera is on and he runs a query on his mobile data terminal and brings data back captured on video. Well, the CJIS information that returned is federally protected CJIS data. It's the state's responsibility to govern and manage that. And the officer and the agency is responsible for making sure that that system and that information as it's going is maintained and protected. Typically, that is more of a policy process, not something, or a procedural piece where the officer identifies they did it, they redact the evidence after the fact, and they do corrective actions and try not to do that anymore. So you train around that kind of problem. But otherwise, every records management system maintained by law enforcement is not a federal CJIS system. It's pre-decisionary often. It's a basic data that needs to be protected and well protected, but it doesn't fall into the same guidelines that the CJIS data itself. It's not an official arrest record that's maintained post-arrest. There's a line that is walked between those. So we definitely have to balance the level of common sense of protecting the data, at the same time not go over the line into the CJIS environment when it's not actually CJIS data, because some very high level expenses can come in from that kind of management. But I do mention that the only way to get clear definition on these policies is by approaching your state CSO, your control security officer. And every state has one, and they're responsible for passing down the CJIS rules. And a state could decide that all the body-worn camera video is going to be included based on their interpretation of what the APB's policy and security policies are. So it really is a state-by-state role to make that decision and to iron it out. And the only way for an agency to identify exactly where they fall is to request up a ruling on that through that process.
Okay, great. Thanks, Mike. And with that, we're going to conclude this afternoon's webinar. I think, as you can see by the fact that we have exceeded our allotted time by over 30 minutes, that this is a very interesting, it's a very important topic. Clearly, it's an emerging topic where there are lots of areas for learning and determination of best practices. We'd like to thank again our speakers, Mike Rusa, Assistant Chief Paul Figueroa, Dr. Mike White, and Ashwini Jaral. On behalf of our Executive Director at the IJIS Institute, we'd like to thank everyone for taking the time to attend the webinar today. As we mentioned earlier, this webinar was recorded and will be available both on our IJIS website and will be available on the BJA website with the body-worn camera toolkit. Thanks again for joining us, and everyone have a great afternoon.